look back to the times in my life when I was the most unhappy is when I was literally checking all of the societal boxes. From the outside, everything looked perfect. I had the house, I had the car, I had the guy, I had the 9 to 5 job as a mental health therapist. Like, I fulfilled everything that society wanted me to. I checked all the boxes, but inside I was dying. I had anxiety, I had low mood. It was the time in my life when I suffered the most, literally, with all of these mental health challenges.
On Stories of Self, we go on journeys into the lives of ourselves and others. We see how stories connect, how they diverge, and how we can create our worlds and solve our problems. This is the real-life remix of storytelling, which is so often stranger than fiction. So come and sit around the fire, chill by the ocean, or get a coffee with me, as I delve into the stories of self that make, break, and remake us. Some stories are dramatic, some are serene, some will magically mirror you, and some will be delightfully different. I'm your host, Katie Reeve-Arnold, and this is Stories of Self. Hey, so this week on Stories of Self, we're here with Kait Melendy again. So thank you, Kait, for coming back to join us again. Kait is a mental health therapist, a coach, and also an author. So she's doing a lot of different things. She's got a lot of different ways you can access her and connect. But today, what I thought we'd talk about is I thought we would talk about the illusion of having the right life. I think that, we quickly develop an idea when we look around us as children of not necessarily just how we are by looking inside ourselves, but how we feel we should be by looking at others' reactions to us and what ways we're being directed, corralled, or channeled to go in. And, we kind of need to belong in order to survive, right? So to be safe and successful, we need to belong in our circle or group or in our society. So what happens then if those things that we take on as the right life actually turn out not to be right for us as individuals? And that can be really unsettling. How do you feel, Kait? Have you ever had that kind of feeling yourself?
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me. Absolutely, yeah. And I know you mentioned I'm coming out with 2 books now. And I do talk about this a lot, actually, in my first book, Wonderless Healing, where, as children, as soon as we enter into school, essentially, like institutions, our parents are kind of our first relationship that we have. But after that, it's the school system, which is an institution. And that alone teaches us, how we need to behave, how we should conform. And when we don't conform to what's expected of us, we are essentially punished, right? Like, I think about how many times as a child I got a detention because I just would not listen. I would not conform.
Yeah.
So for me, I feel like that was something from a young age that was just inbred within me, this kind of like rebellious nature.
Exactly. And we get channeled. We get kind of, as you said, we're punished. We're kind of told, no, we're wrong. We get, crosses on our work if we don't do it as we're told to, if we don't give the right answers. And so then all of a sudden, we're not going our own way. We're going in the direction of the flow that's been created for us. So we're not moving so organically as who we are anymore. We're within someone else's boundaries.
Exactly. So from a very, very young age, and I do a lot of work around connecting with the higher self and with the heart. And from a very young age, this is teaching us to disconnect from that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Right?
Disconnecting from our truth, our alignment of who we are, in order to meet others where they want us to be. And, that's something that we start doing so young that sometimes we actually forget that we have a right to look inside ourselves for what we want and to draw that up as just as important as what anything else wants from us, if not more important, right?
Exactly. And I mean, and it's very difficult to do, especially with the way that society is built and how we're kind of preconditioned to behave in this specific way, right? And
Yeah.
as we continue to grow and go through the institutions, into high school, into university, into society, into the workplace, we just get more and more disconnected from ourselves.
Yeah, and I mean it's illegal in a lot of countries not to send your children to school, and so it's not to participate. And I'm not saying that school is a completely negative environment, because obviously we learn a lot and we are enabled to grow into these different realms that are shown to us. We're enabled to kind of stretch ourselves outside of our homes, but realistically we're still stretching within other people's boundaries. So yeah, it's challenging, it's different, it's difficult, and it kind of carries on, right? That childhood state, or that childlike state of not arguing, not debating, not going against the norm, is kind of then carried through. It's being carried through into this kind of obedient belonging into adulthood as well, into the careers we take on, into the lives we lead. We check off the boxes of what we're supposed to do in life. And that process of individuation has kind of been removed.
It has. It has. And you can see as we go through the different stages, I mean, adults are much more conditioned even than children, right? Like it starts in childhood, but when you compare an adult with a child, it's like you still, you can still sit down and talk to a 7-year-old and they're probably not going to tell you, how stressed they are about life. And, they're not so much in their heads. Yeah. They're still a little connected to their heart and, their higher self, but you can see how that kind of slowly fades away as we cycle through a life. And then by the time we are adults in the workplace, that disconnect has just gotten so ingrained with us and we've gotten so far away from it. I mean, the best way to a lot of the time connect back to our heart is to think, what did I love to do when I was a child?
Yeah, reawaken those things before we turned into these proper little worker bees that just kind of go from the hive to the processing and back and forth. Like reconnecting. And I do wonder sometimes as well if it's if there is something kind of intentional about it, because as a society we've kind of taken out all those ceremonies that help us to cross a threshold into adulthood. So cross the threshold from childhood into adulthood. A lot of them have been removed, or they've been incorporated into other things. So when things actually change now, it's not really, there's not really any ceremony, just celebrating being an adult, just growing up, just growing past a point where you actually have the capacity to live without needing to belong to any set group. You can choose which group you want to belong to. And it kind of feels a bit sad that most of our rites of passage have been eradicated or kind of replaced with going out and getting drunk, which is the official kind of avoidance and numbing technique of adulthood. So we've incorporated that really soon.
And I think all of those, like what you're saying, stem as a way people cope with this disconnect that they have with themselves, right? It's like I do think like almost like subconsciously, like as a soul in a physical body, like we know there's a disconnect, but we just don't know how to find our way back to it. And I think sometimes that can cause so much anxiety and internal conflict within us that a lot of people do turn to just getting drunk, using drugs, numbing themselves out, because it's like they know they're lost, but they just don't know how to find that way back to themselves.
So it calms the storm for a little while, and that peace is desirable, even though it's a short-term peace. It's something that we haven't understood the problem, so we can't really expect to create long-term peace. That disconnect and the perpetuation of that disconnect as well. It's just I wonder how then we could maybe change in society so that we're not fostering such a disconnect. It seems almost like it's beneficial to the maintenance of the society we have to keep people flowing into that worker role where they want to belong, and so therefore they obey.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, and it benefits, like when we were talking about institutions and corporations and governments, I mean, it benefits these larger institutions when everybody is disconnected from themselves. I mean, imagine a world where people were actually connected to their hearts. People would be living their dreams. People wouldn't be allowing themselves to be exploited by a corporation.
Yeah, exactly. And they wouldn't be purchasing as much, because oftentimes over purchasing, and is a way in which we fill the gaps in our lives. We look outside of ourselves to fill the gaps inside, and that turns us into the perfect consumers. So yeah, if we kind of are able to fill a life that is more true to who we are rather than needing to belong, then all of a sudden we're not the perfect consumers anymore.
And all of a sudden we're not as obedient anymore. Right? And I mean, like they say, you know, a society that's controlled is easier to manage.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly if they control themselves, kind of, you know, creating their own kind of trap and then happily walking back into it every day. So it's kind of very difficult then, if you turn around, I mean, you know, as I did at one point, where I found I was on the road to having all the things that were, in inverted commas, the right life. I'd created the right life I was supposed to have for myself, and it wasn't fulfilling me. It just felt like the more I had the right life, the more a void existed within me, like a giant chasm that nothing seemed to fill. And whether I had the money to shop and doing this kind of thing, but it wasn't actually making anything any better.
Oh my gosh, it's so true, 100%. Like when I look back to the times in my life when I was the most unhappy, is when I was literally checking all of the societal boxes. From the outside, everything looked perfect. I had the house, I had the car, you know, I had the guy, I had the 9-to-5 job as a mental health therapist. Like I fulfilled everything that society wanted me to. I checked all the boxes, but inside I was dying. I had anxiety, I had low mood. It was the time in my life when I suffered the most, literally, with all of these mental health challenges that come up. And for me, I see that as like, again, I was talking earlier about how we can, like, our soul knows something is off and we have this internal conflict. And like, for me, that was my body telling me, like the anxiety, the low mood, some of the physical health issues I was having, that was my body trying to communicate to me, hey, like, get back into your heart, get out of your head. Right? And I see that these were all signs but I wasn't listening to my body at the time because I was so disconnected from my heart and living within my head.
But it definitely feels wild as well to get to that point, because I also had a similar thing: the house, the car, the job, the pension, the, you know, everybody, it was everything I should have, you know. And it feels wild to get to that point and actually look around you and find that this isn't necessarily what you want, or it's not right for you, and it feels like you're the odd one out at that point. So it's very difficult then to actually step outside that, realizing something's missing and stepping outside of it. I remember looking around me and just thinking, like, I must be missing something, I must be getting something wrong,
right?
Because I've done all these things, check in all the boxes. So why do I feel like this? Right. And then I made myself bad and wrong for feeling like that, for not feeling how I should feel. I was shitting all over myself, as they say. So it was really, it can be really difficult then, even to just allow yourself to recognize how you feel.
Yes. And then I went through that process too of guilt, of like, what is wrong with me? Why am I not happy? Like, I have everything that I thought I wanted, that society told me I should have, and I'm not happy. Like, what is wrong with me? So then for me, it was the same thing of going through this whole, like, dealing with the guilt of how unhappy I was when I should have been so happy. Right? And that shows kind of the, you know, expectations that society places on us, and anyone who tends to actually follow their heart and maybe fall outside of those expectations, you know, a lot of the time they're wondering, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I not wanting this?
It's very true, Yeah, it's definitely, and that guilt and that shame is a very difficult thing to combat. It's a difficult thing to even look at because we tend to turn away from it and and then we end up turning kind of further into the problem, really.
Yes.
Where the way out is more through, and so it's actually connecting with somebody and talking about, and even journaling or being within yourself, helping yourself to understand with compassion how you're really feeling, and not trying to change it, just trying to be with it as it is, so that you can understand it better. Because I think people a lot of the time jump into wanting to change things. Like we feel bad, we want to change it, right? It's totally understandable, but we don't know how to move from a point until we know where we are.
Right.
And so that's, like trying to find your way without finding where you are to start with.
Right.
And so so that's what we actually really being in compassion with ourselves for where we are.
Yes, and acceptance of where we are, right? Acceptance.
Yeah.
If there's like one concept that I think everyone should practice, is like acceptance of who you are and where you are.
Yeah, radical. I like to call it radical acceptance because
Yes.
it feels radical when you do
Yes.
it, because it's not, you're accepting things that you don't necessarily want to, or you wouldn't like to, but it's only by having accepted them that you can actually make any choices in relation to them or any change away from them.
100%.
So radically accepting some really bad things about myself was part of the past as well, actually.
Absolutely.
But that's what enabled me to change.
100%. Yeah. And I know, like, personally in my work with clients, and I talk about this in Evolved, my second book, is as soon as I would drop the word acceptance, I would be met with so much pushback, because I find a lot of people confuse acceptance with approval. So for example, they would say, well, I'm not going to accept it because I'm not okay with it. But really, acknowledging there's a difference between accepting things for what they are, seeing the reality of it, versus approving of it and saying, I condone it, I'm okay with it. And two very different things, but people tend to use those two terms interchangeably.
Definitely. And there's a very, very big difference between accepting where we are right now and saying that that's where I'm always going to be or where I want to be.
Exactly.
Because, of course, once you accept where you are right now, that gives you a point from which you can change if you want to, if you choose to.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes everything possible. And that acceptance,
the resistance too, right?
Just
speaking like energetically, right? Sometimes when we can just be at peace with where we are, it's like you're lowering the resistance so you can propel yourself towards what you want. Like, accept where you are and work towards what you want.
Exactly. And that resistance is a form of fighting, and you're fighting something. We're almost clinging to our idea of how it is and how we are for being with that.
Yes.
If we can just let go and see ourselves and everything for what it is, then actually it changes that perspective. We're looking with more compassion.
Yes.
It's a really beautiful thing. I think it can be really, really difficult for people, though. People can feel very, very isolated when they realize that they have worked, and it's also however many years. I think it can be very difficult for people to recognize that they have worked for 20 years or 30 years to get a life that they now are not sure they want. And it may well be that they wanted it once upon a time or thought they did. So I think that there's a lot of benefit to forgiving yourself for using all that time and energy to create something that you now don't really want.
Right.
Because it's part of your path towards what you do want.
Right.
It's not that you completely... it's worthless, the time you've spent.
Of course.
It's brought you to where you are. And from there, you move forwards in the way that you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And for me, too, it was also, I think that's where some of the guilt came from, is that acknowledgement of, I created this life because I did at one point think it's what I wanted. And it was what I wanted because it was what society told me I wanted. But again, it just shows how disconnected I actually was from my heart and from my truth, and just living like this pre-programmed robot of like, I've done everything and I thought I wanted it. My head thought I wanted it. But I did not even know the difference between what my head and my heart wanted at the time.
Wow. Yeah, it's really... And did you find as well that when you started to change that, that so many things in your life shifted, that it wasn't only yourself that changed, it was the people around you, and it was like it shifts more because you're exiting a status quo, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my entire life, it was just like all the blocks got knocked over. I mean, my relationship ended. The house got sold. I actually ended up quitting my job. Like, it was like a full purge of everything. It was like cutting ties with what society wanted of me and what I thought I wanted, and actually stepping into what my heart wanted. So I literally just severed everything: the job, the house, the relationship, even the country I lived in. I left not even the city, I left the country.
And I think sometimes we can vision to ourselves that all these things that we have in our lives, they're pillars that hold up our life. But actually, when you remove them all, you carry on living.
Yes.
But it's not that they are essential to our survival.
Yeah.
We still carry on and we build something new.
Exactly.
I think a lot of time people are afraid to let go of what they have because they fear what will happen when they don't have it.
Right.
But the answer is with trust within themselves and the capacity they build within themselves, they'll build something new the same way as they built that.
Exactly, yeah. In that period of my life, it gave me so much resilience. And I always kind of pull from it now. And I'm like, I created it once, I can create it again.
Exactly.
Only now I'm creating it from my heart space instead of from my mind, from my head. Like, I'm creating it in a way that I want to create it and not how I feel like society wants me to create it.
And in that authenticity, in creating as who you truly are, what you bring to life is something no one else can bring.
Exactly.
So in that, in a way, you've become even more valuable than you could have been trying to fit a cookie cutter mold that society places us all in at the beginning.
Absolutely, yeah. I always say, like, authenticity is your superpower. So, like, own it and live in your authenticity. Like, really, like, capitalize on what makes you unique, because that's how you're going to contribute most to the world.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kate. That's so inspiring.
Thank you.
I know that you've got your second book out now, so that's really exciting. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Evolved. So it's available for pre-order. It's coming out on December 26th. So I essentially took all of the work that I've done with clients over the past 9 years as a therapist, and I categorized the main issues that I found into the 5 most common issues, and I addressed them all in my book. So there's definitely something in there for everybody to be able to relate.
Fabulous.
So, yeah.
That sounds great.
And and if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to me on Instagram. Kait Melendy is my name, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kate. Take care. Bye-bye. We are all telling our stories, and we are all telling ourselves stories about it all. Are you brave enough to walk with me into hearing, considering, and understanding the stories we tell? Join me next time, where we'll be considering more stories and illusions and stepping into creating the freedom we desire. Every moment, we are who we are choosing to be. You choose. Choose you, because your story matters.